so what am I thinking now? No. I was thinking I sure must be in trouble. Let's get rid of that.
So tell me, I ordered it, it's under 4 size. It doesn't show up on the screen.
No, I just can't see it.
I'll have them on Monday. That's a
I'm telling you to find your seat.
We're waiting for the commissioner.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today is Tuesday, September 20th, 2022. Start by indicating who is here and call this meeting to order.
Clark Nelson.
Chris Wynn. Nicole McDermott.
Julie Jackson.
Terry Bodden.
Rich Nye.
And Karen Winder. Welcome, everybody in attendance today, as well as those who are joining us. Are we streaming, Ben? Are we live? We're good. All right, awesome. Okay, first on the agenda, we have an emergency plan update. We're going to turn it to Roger. Are you taking the lead, or Chief Porter? Who's taking the lead here? Don? Oh, see, none of the above. All right, that works.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time this evening. We just wanted to, again, refresh you of emergency preparedness, safety, security, responses, all of that we're trying to continually work on for our students. So again, we want to gain an understanding of what student safety and security measures are in place. We all want to talk about understanding what issues and actions or events are of concern. And then, of course, we want to always get feedback as to whether you want to address, change, or modify any of these thoughts to make our schools safer. I'll just quickly do the introduction, remind everybody of the philosophy and some of the physical facility issues. Roger will take care of an emergency management update, a lot of progress through him and his office. And then Chief Porter will talk about different security implementation recommendations. So again, when we think about safety and security, we always want to build that structure of support for our students. We want to have school climates that reduce violence. We will always look at hardening physical buildings. We'll want to do threat assessments. If something pops up, we want to know what, when, and why as early as possible. We want to create routine safety controls, simple things. I always say our kids are super polite, but I don't want you opening a side door for the Amazon delivery guy, right? Just simple things like that. And then, of course, we always want strong relationships with our first responders, be they fire, EMS, or also police departments. So again, it's important that we have that very healthy security culture. It's not something that goes away. It's not one and done, one event a year. We always have to grow it. We always need to invest in that. And it's really regular, continual practice by not only folks in the district office, but most importantly by folks in our schools. Okay. Once we transform that security culture, it becomes a nice life cycle, and it gives us the returns we're after. Again, remember, a security culture that is sustainable is very deliberate, and it will be disruptive. We're all very aware of disruptive every time we go on a flight, right? I'm still taking off my shoes. I'm still going through screenings. That's deliberate. It has to be engaging. People want to do things that make it safe for themselves and for their students, and even challenge them of some of those challenges. People that invest their time and effort need to understand that what they're doing is a benefit to their students. And that, of course, we want to make sure that we lower our vulnerabilities, and that once we lower those vulnerabilities, we start gaining traction, and that gives us a multiplier effect on safety and security and response. And again, some of just those new things, the LIVE model, look, listen, implement action, vigilance, and evaluate continuously. We always talk about run, hide, fight, or get out, hide out, take out. It's not always lock yourself behind a closed door. It could be all of those and above. And that's where the implementing action and maintaining vigilance goes into effect. And that's where you're pushing some decision-making very local down to the classrooms, because they're in their situation and they often know what is best for them. Roger.
All right. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name's Roger Brooks. I'm your emergency manager. I've met most of you on the board here, but I'm happy to be here in person and finally meet all of you together. I'm going to talk a little bit about emergency management and the progress that we've made over the last 2.5 years since I've been here. Obviously, the first year and a half or so got consumed with COVID, like everything else. So the goals that we have in emergency management are to bring some consistency to the district in the way we respond to things, the way we do things. We want to become better prepared for any emergency that would come our way. And we want to improve our response as a whole, whether that's at the district level or at the school level. So to give you an update of some of the things that we've done and that we are doing, we have developed a district emergency operations plan, or EOP, and we've updated the emergency quick reference guide to go along with the changes that we made in our district-wide plan. We've implemented the incident command system, the ICS, and conducted training from principals, and we'll continue training on an individual basis at the school level. ICS is an important factor in our new plans, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and give you an introduction to that here in a minute. We are currently updating our Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, and how the district responds to emergencies. For those of you who are not familiar with what an EOC is, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. A lot of this that we're developing is geared towards a district-wide response to an emergency, rather than everybody just kind of go to the scene and do what they can. We're trying to get a more organized response to things. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. We have also developed a district-wide reunification plan that goes along with all this. And all of these have been implemented for this school year. They have been completed and are in place for this school year. And just know that all the work that we're doing, the implementing and everything that we're doing is based off of what is considered best practice across the country. We're not just throwing mud against the wall and hoping that it sticks. We're making sure that we do our research, that we really look at the things that we're implementing, and making sure that they're considered what's best for our schools and our district. So the district EOP, the Emergency Operations Plan, it's modeled from a template and information provided from FEMA, and it is very heavy in the incident command system and ICS. And that's one of the big reasons why, and is really the reason why, that we've brought ICS on board for our school district, and that we now require all of our administrators to take online FEMA courses related to ICS, so that they get trained on ICS. The plan outlines the responsibilities of school administrators and district personnel in any type of emergency and how to respond. And we also have updated the school emergency response plans accordingly. The CERPs, many of you are familiar that all the schools have to do their individual emergency response plans every year. So we've updated those to match our district plan, and we've also updated our emergency quick reference guide. So what is ICS, and what's the benefits of ICS? ICS gives us an organized response and structure both at the district and at the school level. This gives us a way to kind of throw the chaos that we have going on around us into a structure, okay? It gives distinct roles and responsibilities so that everybody has an idea of what they're supposed to be doing. It eliminates duplication of efforts, and then really it allows us to maintain a disciplined response to any emergency. Those are the key benefits of having ICS on board. So I told you about our EOC. We've had an EOC here in the past, and we're just updating that and kind of updating how we respond to our emergencies. So an emergency operations center is a physical or virtual location from which the leaders in the district here can coordinate information and resources to support what's going on at the school level or where that emergency is occurring. To that end, the EOC helps provide a coordinated response. In the past, we've had emergencies happen, and district level administrators, everybody would basically just go to the site where the emergency occurred. We're trying to change the way that we think and trying to change the way we respond to that by having our administrators, or at least a set people that will respond to our EOC here at the district offices, so that we can do our planning, we can coordinate our resources and deliver our resources to where the emergency needs to be more effectively rather than trying to do it from the scene there. Also, everybody responding to the scene kind of just clutters that scene too, right? So it's a little bit more organized and better way to respond to things. The EOC supports resources, needs, and requests, including allocation and tracking. And it coordinates plans and determines current and future needs. One of the things you have to think about when you have an emergency is what happens after. That's one of the things that's going to happen in EOC. They're going to plan for that after, for the recovery phase of this. That's just one of the many things that will be going on at the EOC, but it gives you an idea of, you know, if you're at the scene of an emergency, it's really difficult to sit down and start planning for what to do after, right? If you're away from the scene, it gives you that ability to sit there and start really, once one person is assigned to that, they can just go out and start planning for that part of the emergency. And then lastly, an EOC provides coordination and policy and direction. So the district reunification plan, it was developed to bring consistency. We talked about consistency before, and it's really important to have throughout the district. We did a reunification drill at Lake Ridge Elementary last year to practice this plan. The plan was mostly complete at that point, but we wanted to kind of vet the plan and make sure that it worked, so we had this drill. It gave us some really good feedback. We made a few changes and whatnot to the plan, and then we were able to finalize that. We've also developed reunification kits. They're a 25-gallon bin with wheels and a handle that each school has been delivered one of these. And inside those kits is all the necessities to do a reunification. So they're able to just, if they have to go off-site, they grab that bin, they roll it with them wherever they go, they open it up, and it has all the materials that they need to do a reunification off-site. Those kits, as I said, have been delivered to all the schools over the summer.
Can I ask you really quickly, how heavy are those? Like how easy could elementary kids roll them, or is that going to be?
Well, we discouraged any of the elementary kids of pulling those. Obviously, we were hoping a staff member can do that, but I think a fifth grader could roll that bin pretty easily, yes.
I would say from a lifting perspective, 40 pounds is about it. So it's that.
But you're not really lifting that because it's on wheels. You just have to lift half of it, the handle, and pull it. So it's not too bad.
Is this also, though, in a natural disaster, would they also be able to take this, and then they might have to lift it over things? So.
Yeah, that's the intent, that it is
Yes.
big enough or small enough for an adult to manage these. And again, we think about, you know, floods, be they man-made or act of God, want to get out, do things, natural gas leaks, like you say, natural disasters like earthquakes, et cetera. So they're very mobile and can go around and do what they need to do.
And I have an example of one. I can actually go grab it and bring it down here for you guys to look at afterwards if you'd like. And we have copies of both plans here for you guys to take a look at later too if you want.
I have a quick question also. That reunification was at Lake Ridge at the elementary. Are we doing a secondary school reunification type
Funny you asked that
drill?
question. October 6th, we're doing one at Matheson Junior High. In fact, I just had our planning meeting. I came straight from there to here for that. So we are doing a junior high one. It's going to look a little bit different than last year's. We're going to make it a little more realistic. Last year's was just a vet to plan. This is actually going to be, let's test how real this gets, you know. So it'll be a more realistic type drill.
My name's Randy Porter. I've been a police officer with Granite School District for 18 years, and I've served as chief for the past 5. Back in March, the superintendent asked me to chair a committee. We call it the Security Implementation Recommendations Committee, or Circ. And our charge is to develop and research school security options and bring recommendations for implementation to you and the superintendent. Committee members are myself, Don Adams, Leslie Bell, John Welburn, Doug Larson, Rich Nilsson, Roger Brooks, and Ben Horsley. We have reviewed a number of options. Our top recommendations for Granite School District is for the implementation of a weapons detection hardware and screening process for our high schools. There are several vendors and options that we have evaluated, and this is something that is needed to deter weapons from being in our schools, specifically our high schools. Our second top recommendation is to continue to develop and implement additional perimeter security for all schools. But things like better fencing and gating at all schools are needed with the goal of hardening the target. Some of the Circ projects in progress. We are working on a weapons detection K9. We're hoping to have that K9 deployed in January of this next year that's coming up. We are working to develop a comprehensive district safety plan. And the foundations of any safety plan for a school district is a layered approach that consists of physical security, things like single entry, fencing, access control, cameras. The second layer is site building design features, signage, video, doorbells, things like that. The third layer is personnel and staff, who is in the schools, SROs, the equipment that they have, threat assessment teams. The fourth layer is policy and procedure, things like student and staff ID, parking passes, visitor management, etc. And the fifth layer is training for both staff and students. In regards to that plan, there's currently an RFP issued for a consultant to help us write that. We have been working with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. This is an arm of Homeland Security. We do have a school lined up to be assessed this coming October. Additional projects we have going on are we continuously have joint police training. Granite Police trains with other allied agencies. For example, we had a large-scale training event at Cypress just before the school year started. Just at the end of last school year, we had a training with South Salt Lake at Wilson. And this is active shooter, direct threats to the school type responses. We also train with the fire departments for rescue task force training. And that concludes our slides. Are there any questions that we could answer for you?
Yeah, I wanted to just ask when, one of the major things or things that I think can impact security is the layout of the building, which we can impact in most of, our schools, but in our new schools we can. So I just wonder if one of you could speak to how we make sure that when we look at our buildings, what are some of the things, well, I know you don't want to necessarily speak to individual things that we do for those buildings, but can you just speak to that issue of new buildings and security?
So I think you're seeing a lot of remodeling that helps us also mirror what we want to see in new buildings. And so, we've been working hard to get through all 63 of our elementaries with those single point of entry secure buildings. We place door position switches that tell us when a door is ajar or not. That's the last thing we want to have happen. So you're seeing us model a lot of that in our new building designs as well. Maybe some certain doors that close that can help segment the building as well. There are a lot of physical assets that we work on. Now we're looking a little bit broader to talk about where the fencing should be placed, eliminating certain walkway gates or controlling those through access control. Again, as part of that layered approach, we just don't want everything open, and especially during the school day, for folks to just walk in without having a conversation with some adults. Yeah.
Well, and I remember being able to physically see when we were looking at a replica of what Westlake Junior will be like, that you could stand in one spot and see almost everybody in the, there was an openness to that, so that you couldn't find little nooks and crannies. And I know that that's been a tricky question, for example, with our building at Skyline, is making sure there aren't places where people can just be on their own and we can't find where they are.
Yeah, the ability to avoid little nooks and crannies, the ability to see a long distance in a building is very helpful. That's also helpful, kind of even simple things in older buildings help us do that. A presence of adults in the hallway also reduces bullying events, things of that nature. And so the ability to see, the ability to interact is key in reducing a lot a lot of our issues and behaviors in schools. So that is part of it. It's, you know, that presence of the adult, the ability to not necessarily duck and hide. There are some of our older buildings that, when they were very full, we put in some locker banks back in the day that would make looking down a hallway a challenge. And so those, now that we don't have 3,000, 4,000 kiddos in some of our buildings, we're able to move those locker banks and give us the view corridors back.
I had a couple of other questions, but I don't want to dominate the conversation.
I just have one. That's good. That EOC committee that you said is made up of district officials and response people, do they coordinate with the local law enforcement still? Is that the committee that would be?
So are you
or sorry,
referring to
not the committee.
the Circ committee?
The
or
Circ committee, yes, thank you.
Sorry.
So we have been, the Circ committee started back in March, and we have, we don't have any committee members from other jurisdictions on the committee. However, we have been consulting and communicating with our partners and looking for best practices, not just in Utah, but across the country.
Okay, thanks.
Just a couple of questions.
Let me turn my mic on. You have to put it closer so we can
All
hear
right,
you.
sorry about that. In regards to the weapon detection and screening for high schools,
It's on.
what kind of a cost are we looking at? I mean, it says you're evaluating those. What kind of a cost, and how quickly are you foreseeing us be able to implement that if that's what we decide to do?
In regards to cost, there is one company that I think is very good. They've given us a quote for the hardware for the high schools, anywhere between approximately $800,000 to $1 million for the hardware.
And what does that hardware look like?
It is it's very similar to a magnetometer, a metal detector, but it's not a standard metal detector. It allows for high flow people to walk through very quickly, so you don't have long lines. And there's also a screening process that goes along with that, that makes the process go quickly. The last thing we want is a long line of students or staff waiting to get inside the building.
So how quickly are you projecting or wanting to try to implement something like that?
That would depend on the board and the direction and the willingness to adopt such a program. This would entail, for the most part, single entry at high schools. Some high schools would have dual entries. But there's a further conversation we need to have with the board and district leadership about how to do that. And funding is another key aspect. And staffing, that is another huge issue. If we were to staff those weapons detections systems with only police officers, the estimate is $4.2 million a year. However, there are other strategies the district could entail and employ other types of employees to reduce that annual cost.
And those costs are to go, is for it, that system to be at every high school, or
Yes.
that was what you're estimating for? High
Yes.
schools?
The 800,000 to $1 million, that was per location?
No, that's
Or
the entire district.
That's the entire
That's the
district.
entire district.
That's every high school or every secondary school?
That is only high schools, and that's an annual cost.
The 800 to $1 million is an annual cost, not just one time.
That's the initial cost, and then there is an annual that is not that much. I don't have that paperwork in front of me.
Okay.
The maintenance, the license agreement is not that much annually.
Chief, is that our 8 traditional high schools? Or does that include our
That-
other post-high, not post,
It does include Granite Connections.
Granite Connect and, okay.
Yes.
Along with that, how do we make sure, what's the process, like, what's to stop a kid from go sneaking around and letting their friend in on the side and bypass that system? How do we do that?
Kids would do that, wouldn't they?
That's the door position sensors, some cameras, and some other technologies that basically alert us if there's a fault in the system, a breach, if you will.
And that's included in that initial cost?
No, that's additional on the building. Mhm.
Is
And
that-
we have some of that infrastructure in place. We just have to fine tune and coordinate.
My questions were, I know I've talked to you about this before, Don, but about the fencing access as well as the ID tags. You know, that's my thing that I've asked. It does concern me that we have access particularly to many of our elementary schools, but I don't know if it happens as much at the high schools, but private fences that have access. To me, that's a huge, that to me is a big concern. Where are we on that? Is that, what's the price tag for that? And have we started on that? That's.
Right.
That's my question.
Yeah, no, those are the fun ones. We do have, so Steve Thompson's in attendance. He's the new, we'll call him the new Keith Bradshaw, handles real estate issues, et cetera. So we've been doing some of our due diligence, which is working with state risk, making sure that we concur and have similar opinions on access from random properties on our property. They believe from a risk perspective it's unacceptable. We've reached out to different attorneys to make sure that we have legal justification to remove those. Those are access points on our property. No one's ever permitted to them. Even if they have a principal or et cetera, we have the right to close that off. And so the real question is picking out those that are the most important and starting to work our way down. And we're also working on different controls of just those neighborhood catwalks and how we maintain access at the right commuting times into our schools and et cetera, and then isolate those so we have security in the day. So it's a long process. There will be a lot of neighbors that will not be excited when they're asked to remove those. Maybe we do some fencing repair, et cetera. It's just not something that we put a dollar tag on right now. It's something that we can chip away with, or it would require a little bit of capital infusion to take care of those fencing problems, but it shouldn't be insurmountable. It's primarily chain link, so it's not always a challenge.
Have we started on it?
We've removed a few.
Okay. And has that gone okay?
About as smooth as a bumpy road. Just working with folks that have different opinions and you know, have had those for many years, and then we're just cutting those off.
Sure. I just want to reiterate, I think that to me is a huge concern when especially if it comes from a private property or a private community or something like that.
Yeah.
I have a much bigger concern about that than some of our other things there, so.
Yep, understandable.
I wanted to know if, you know, we're talking a lot about our population and trying to, you know, we're looking at how to maximize our population in different schools. And so I wonder what information there is about population and security. I would assume that a smaller school is safer.
I don't see that correlation, no.
Oh, really? Are you saying you don't see it, or you haven't read any research about that, or you know?
Well, you have internal and external threats.
Mm-hmm.
External threats are not related upon the population size of a school,
Right.
right? So
That's right.
you cannot draw a correlation there. I think you're wondering if smaller schools have better school atmospheres or there's less confusion. I haven't seen, you can see research that goes both ways on it. So I'm not, based upon my reading and working with others in security industries, no one's drawn that tight correlation to say, no, without a doubt, X and Y.
Do you have a hypothesis, Julie, as to why you believe you were led to believe that way?
I don't have nothing but like instinct to make me say that. Like the idea that you have like a ton of people in a school and there could be a kid there that's unknown is higher likelihood than when it's a smaller school and that kid's needs are more likely to be known in my mind. But I don't necessarily think that's true either now that I'm thinking through it, because you'd have more personnel there, hopefully, right? I think I'm more just asking the question than I am asserting that I think I know.
I'm not aware of any research that would indicate a smaller school is safer. If you look at some major incidents, Sandy Hook or Uvalde, those aren't huge schools. And as Don said, those were affected by external factors and threats. So I couldn't either draw a conclusion that smaller schools are safer.
Thanks.
So I have two questions. And I think kind of in regarding to that system you're saying where people are walking through at a rapid rate. We do have teachers that can legally carry. So how do you approach that for those that are legal? And then my second question is if it's like a one-way entrance to high school, what about employees that need, like, they go in a different door because it's closer to their classroom because they have that accommodation made for them. So can you address, maybe that's too into the weeds. We can, yeah.
That's part of policy we need to develop. Our staff we could discuss them bypassing the system with ID by the person that's manning that system. And along with that ID comes access control. Perhaps we have a policy that allows them to enter a door that they're allowed to enter with that access control. But those are questions that we haven't answered in policy. We still need to develop.
Okay, but they're on your radar because I
Yes.
think that's our concern. Okay. All right, we've got a second presentation to get to. Any
Can I
further?
ask you a
Oh,
question?
go ahead, Terry.
On the perimeter security of our schools, I think we'd all agree our elementaries seem to be a little easier with fencing and stuff like that. What are you proposing or looking at for perimeter security for our high schools, especially where we have students and people coming and going all the time? What do you see as best practice, and can we really get to that?
Well, there's a number of options. As far as perimeter security, it may not be a physical aspect. When I attended Hunter High, we had what we called a gate lady, a person that monitored students as they left for lunch and came back in and monitored traffic all day long. That is one aspect that could help.
How did that work?
I felt that it worked well. I was caught tardy once, had my ID punched, and wasn't allowed to leave again.
Okay.
So
I never heard that happened, so thank you. What else are you looking at?
we're looking at gates for parking lots, bollard type systems. There are areas around high schools that could use some fencing, things of that nature.
Because whenever we start to talk about shutting a campus down, and it's not an open campus, there's a lot of people in the public who
Yes,
get real upset.
there is a social stigma that if we do that, we turn our schools into prisons.
Yeah.
And my response is that we're not trying to do that. We're trying to make the schools into castles.
And I appreciate that. It's just that we have to look at all sides of that, and I know it's a difficult thing. All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have one more follow-up question as well. Can you speak a little bit to communication in the event of some, or in circumstances of some event, whether it be a lockout or a lockdown? I know there's kind of an email protocol currently that patrons and parents of a school will get an email. I'm hearing some feedback that maybe that's less desirable, that there needs to be quicker, there needs to be more efficient communication go out. So I'm curious what your feelings are about text notifications or something of that like, or maybe you can just kind of educate me a little bit better on what the protocols are, when and how you communicate to parents in the event of an incident near or at a school.
So I'll talk just a little bit about communications within the schools, and then I'll let Ben answer the second part of that question. Communication in any emergency is where your biggest downfall is. It's difficult to communicate to the folks that you're trying to, as your responders, you're trying to get a hold of the people you need to get a hold of and get your resources out. And communication is always where the breakdown is. Currently, we have every school is kind of fending for themselves as far as communication within their staff members at the school level. They all have to come up with their own text message threads of some sort or whatever, and some of them do and some of them don't, and it's just kind of hit and miss. Some of it works. Most of them do a really good job of putting something together and having that text thread working. What we are trying to do as a district is again, we want to get some consistency throughout the district. One of the things that we just actually sent to an RFP is a emergency communications software platform that we're going to purchase, and that software platform will greatly increase our communications efforts as where emergency response is concerned. It will help our EOC, it will help our teachers and staff members and principals at the school level, and it will help us as district leaders have a better form of communication. So that's where we're at for that piece of it. As far as the messaging that goes out to the parents and whatnot, I'll let Ben respond to that.
We do have a pretty consistent protocol that we follow. In any sort of emergency protocol, we always make notification as soon as possible using, depending on the circumstances, the event. If it's a lockout, was formerly known as a shelter in place, where there's less of a direct threat or no direct threat to our schools or campus, it's just precautionary. It usually entails an email and a text message. And then after the event is over, usually 15, 20 minutes later, a follow-up, the message, everything is proceeding as normal now. That's 98% of our communication. We usually try to do a follow-up in the afternoon, reminding parents what a protocol is, what the other protocols are, taking advantage of the situation to remind them of those protocols. We have a consistent way that we go about that, and we have templates in place for schools to use, but generally about 95% of the time my department just takes all of those, and we're posting to social media as soon as appropriate. We want the phone call and text message to hit before they see it on social media. We generally get pushback if they see it on social media before the phone call comes. And I think sometimes people don't understand when you're notifying, for instance, at Granger High School, 3,200 families, that a phone call actually does take anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes to process. Even on just a smaller school, it can be 5 to 7 minutes for that system to work. And so it's not instantaneous. Social media is. And so sometimes we try to time that out as quickly as we can. Each situation is very dynamic and unique. And I would say what I always try to reiterate to parents when we do get concerns is our primary responsibility is to secure the school and ensure student safety, and then we will communicate with you. And so generally when you kind of approach it that way, I find most parents are like, yeah, that's the right thing to do. And I think they can understand that sometimes there might be a little bit of a delay. We had a protocol just yesterday or the day before. I can't remember what day it is. It was yesterday because it's a Tuesday, right? Check me on that. And we knew the protocol was going to be lifted shortly after it was initiated. It was like a 7-minute event. And so we actually held off just to see if that was in fact the case. So we weren't sending multiple messages. Then it was just one once that in fact occurred. Again, each of those situations dynamic, usually 3 communications in total.
I think you've kind of touched on this with respect to your last point with how dynamic the situations can be, but can you, just as a final point, also clarify how much you're able to share in those communications and why you share what you do and why you don't share what you don't?
Yeah, oftentimes very little, and I think sometimes I'll get calls from the media asking what's happened, and I usually push those off until we communicate with families first. And oftentimes I'm referring media over to a police agency because we don't know what happened. We just had a police officer come into our facility and say, you need to go onto this emergency protocol. And so we usually try to share that to the extent that we can. We're aware that police are serving a warrant in the area. This is a precautionary protocol if and when that's appropriate. You can imagine in certain circumstances, law enforcement don't want us to divulge something that could hamper their investigation as well. And so oftentimes we're not informed and we're simply giving them information. There's no direct threat to our school. And this is just simply a precautionary protocol to ensure student safety. But if and when we do have information, we do share it.
Did the language of that change for everybody? Is that now consistent across all LEAs and like for lockout, lockdown?
The emergency protocol language is now universal. And you've seen the new posters. If you see old ones, take them down.
We'll say it's consistent language by the larger districts. When you say all LEAs also include charter schools. I don't know what every charter school does, but our districts, our fellow public school districts are now consistent up and down the Wasatch Front.
Okay, thank you.
Mike's not on. There we go. Thanks, guys, for being here. I know we all have questions, but we're excited to see where that Circ committee goes with the details moving forward. Thank you. Oh, Roger, you okay?
Well, we've had an emergency.
All right, make sure everybody's okay. All right, second on our agenda, we have a presentation on our corrective discipline. Doug Larson's here to talk us through this. Now, board members, we have about 10, 11 slides. If we can get through these, if you'll make note of your questions, and then we'll open it up for discussion once he's all the way through. Fair enough?
Fair enough for me. Thanks for being here. Let me just see if I can get this rolling. So, conversation came up in a staff meeting a bit ago, and the issue came up that there were some questions about particular employees and what the process was going to be in terms of making corrections with respect to some of those employees. And the idea came up that, I've not, at least not for a long time, talked to the board specifically about our corrective discipline process. So I wanted to do that tonight. That's our objective this evening. If you've got questions, I'm happy to answer them, but only according to Chair Winder's direction. The purpose and obligation for this evening is to maintain the purpose and obligations of our corrective discipline process. Number one is to maintain the strongest, most talented workforce. That's actually in your board policies, the board policies that refer directly to the board. One of your jobs is to make sure that we are maintaining the best possible workforce, and that is part and parcel of what we do in terms of corrective discipline. We also are obligated to ensure due process. We'll talk about that in a subsequent slide. Part of due process is that certain processes are set up by statutes and regulations and district policies. And so we comply with the state statute 53G 11501 at SEC. That is what used to be called the Orderly Termination Act. It's gone through some iterations, and the name of it now is ridiculously long, but it is the same thing. It actually gives us requirements as to how we go through what we have to do prior to letting an employee go or separating employment. And we also have negotiated agreements that are additional obligations of the district that we've negotiated with, particularly with GEA. And we've also got negotiated agreements that we still hold on to from our previous negotiations with other bodies as well. And we try to follow those as closely as we can. We also keep in mind that corrective discipline is just that. It's to correct behavior or performance that needs to be corrected so that our employees can be successful. And that can't be stressed enough. All right, let's start with due process. Due process is a constitutional principle, and contract and career employees in the district, they have a property interest in continued employment, meaning they have a property interest in their job. And they cannot be deprived of that property interest without due process of law, and that's a constitutional principle. Districts must comply with general due process principles, laws, and contracts, as we just stated. The state code, administrative rules, and negotiated agreements are among those. Corrective discipline is progressive. It is mandated by state statute, and it follows a standard sequence based upon best practice and severity of conduct. So what that means is that we essentially have established a program or a sequence of events that are triggered by misconduct, by poor performance, and we have a set procedure for dealing with those and trying to deal with them at the lowest possible level, right? So let's talk about what that means. Well, there's two areas, and I'm going to just divide discipline into two areas. The first is performance. The second is cause. And they're handled very differently. It's not always easy to determine what conduct or what behavior falls within each of those categories. But the statute itself is actually divided into categories of performance and cause. And so we, meaning the district, does the same thing. We categorize certain behavior or performance into one of those two categories. And performance, obviously, is an employee who's not performing duties commensurate with standards, expectations, or directives. Based on observations, and we conduct observations annually as well as, we conduct evaluations annually. We conduct observations ongoing. So based on observations, evaluations, and corrective discipline, employees are issued warnings and placed on plans of assistance. The state statute specifically refers to plans of assistance. If someone is not performing up to standard, then we go through a process of placing that individual on a plan of assistance, meaning we provide goals, interventions, some interventions, what's the word I'm looking for? Some resources, such as intervention specialists, additional training, monitoring, and feedback. We have a template of what our plans of assistance typically look like. And anytime that they are necessary, they are rolled out. And depending on the performance of an employee thereafter, it depends on whether or not they're able to move through that plan of assistance, terminate that plan of assistance, and move ahead, or whether that will result in additional discipline. Performance is typically the area where districts struggle the most, simply because it's not quite as definitive in terms of how people perform. But we have done our district and other districts have done everything we can to kind of quantify what that performance looks like, and then we hold our folks accountable. Cause is the flip side of that same coin. These are substantive violations of state law and regulations, district conduct policies, and or directives. So our district administrators, principals, and supervisors investigate and gather data and make findings and conclusions related to violations of those laws, regulations, and policies. And then they take appropriate action, meaning that they issue discipline. And discipline can range from an informal correction, from simply talking to an employee and making needed correction, or it can lead to district level, school level warnings, district to school department level warnings, district level warning, suspension, and or termination. And that's kind of the range of discipline in our district. And again, we step through those. We don't jump directly to termination in most cases. That depending on the severity, depending on the kind of cause issue that we're talking about, we go through a process of correction and allow people the opportunity to correct their behavior. Suspension and termination are issued by the assistant superintendent only, meaning that we have low-level discipline at the school level. We have district-level discipline that's also issued by principals and supervisors. But once we get to that point where we start to take away from the property interest of that individual, meaning we start to take away from the job, whether that's suspension or termination, those decisions are turned over to an assistant superintendent, and decisions are made only based on those referrals. We have and created some time ago, actually Mike Frazier and Martin created some time ago a corrective discipline manual. We have about 10 years, 8 years ago, we created a 2.0 version, which is much better. But it is our corrective discipline manual, and it is a step-by-step manual. And this slide shows kind of the flow chart that we go through in terms of our corrective discipline. That is found right here in our manuals. That flow chart, principals and supervisors know specifically how to step through every single step of corrective discipline. We actually have a step-by-step process that we go through for cause and for performance, as you can see. And so we try to standardize our corrective discipline so that it's all being done the same in every location, and that we're treating every employee the same. That's the goal for standardization, okay? Part of that standardization is we've also built in a process whereby principals, if they are going to issue discipline that is at district level or above, then we require them to come to the district and meet with one of our two committees, either the ASK or CAST committees. The ASK committee is for certified employees. CAST committee is for non-certified employees. And what we have are the SLIDs make up the ASK committee and me. And in our CAST committee, that's made up of some directors who are experts in this field.
I'm just going to interrupt.
Yeah.
Can you explain what a SLID is? Because a lot of people don't know what a SLID means.
Sorry, a SLID are the directors over our principals. Okay, so every principal has a director to whom they report, and those SLIDs actually report to, thank you, School Leadership and Improvement Director, and those SLIDs report to John. So we have these committees so that our principals can come to the district. They have the support of those committees. They're able to vet their thinking with those committees, and then they're able to make the best corrective discipline decisions after they've had an opportunity to speak to that committee. So that is another protection. It's another due process protection because it is another layer of decision-making that goes into the process. Okay, this mitigates liability on individual administrators as well as the district, which is helpful. Now, I failed to mention there is another category, there are a couple of categories of employees. The one that we've been talking about are contract and career employees. Those are individuals that either have a contract with the district or they've worked for us on an hourly, as an hourly employee long enough and for enough hours that they qualify as a career employee. However, prior to anyone qualifying as a contract or career employee, they actually go through a period of 3 years of provisional status. Okay, so at any time during that 3 year, you cannot, we, the district, if it's justified, can non-renew that contract of a provisional employee. Due process in this process is minimal, and it's by design. That comes directly from the statute. And the due process that's due is essentially notice and an opportunity to improve if we're talking about performance issues. But at the end of each year, someone who is a provisional employee is subject to non-renewal. There's also a kind of a higher level of investigation that occurs. So as I mentioned, for your run-of-the-mill discipline issues, principals and department directors typically or supervisors will do the investigation. However, if there is a cause issue, something that is egregious enough that it could lead or expose that employee to potential termination, then that is investigated by policy and legal services. And I was hired in the district as an investigator initially, and that's a big part of what I do. As I conduct investigations and as I tell employees, I'm an independent investigator. It's actually helpful to have an independent investigator in some of these higher level issues, some of these higher stakes issues, because I don't report to a principal, I don't report to John, I only report to the superintendent. And so my investigations are therefore objective and independent investigations. The only difference here is that I make a report of the findings and conclusions, and I present those findings and conclusions directly to an assistant superintendent, and then the assistant superintendent determines whether or what level of discipline is appropriate up to and including termination at that time. Okay. Lastly, if someone is terminated and there is separation of employment, then there are appeal rights granted to any contract or career employee if they believe that the district has violated its policies, the negotiated agreements, or principles of due process. There is a process of appeal. And I think, what, three of you or four of you have gone through this before, where an employee at the end of that process has appealed for wrongful termination. And under our policies and our negotiated agreements, the board is able to appoint a hearing officer, which we've done in every case, and that hearing officer then brings to you findings and recommendations based on the prior termination. And then you as the board are the final arbiter. You get to make that decision as to whether or not that termination should or should not be upheld. But I want to emphasize this point that the board is the final arbiter. So in these employment matters, it is important that the board maintain an arm's length from these employee circumstances, from these employee investigations, the discipline and that sort of thing, because at the end of the day, you could be a decision maker if that employment decision were to go all the way to an appeal, and you would be, we don't want to bias you in any way or have you somehow needing to recuse yourself from being a decision maker in those circumstances. And finally, because I'm trying to become a better person and put good out into the world, I always end all my slides with Mr. Rogers, and that's the end.
This minute.
Go ahead. I cruised right through those. I tried.
I am just saying, I'm proud of you, board. We did it. We made it all the way through a presentation, except for I did interrupt you on the slid, but that was just to say what that acronym meant. The reason we wanted to just kind of bring this forward to everybody and even our own board members is you just touched on this last point of, as board members, we're engaged, we're out in our community, we are walking the halls of the schools, and when you are in schools, sometimes you hear things, oftentimes you hear things, complaints about something not going well, or a concern from a parent, or even a concern from a school employee about another parent or another employee, or, you know, on and on and on. Our job isn't necessarily to fix the problems as board members, but to be the liaison to take that concern to the administration. And then the tricky part is handing that over.
Right.
And there may be times where something ends up in an employee file, but we don't know, because I want the public to understand we don't have any right to any personnel file for an employee. So the board members don't get to walk into HR and say, can I see what's written on this person? For the very reason, and I believe it's Connie, Terry, and I have sat through this appeals process twice now, where it's gone all the way through the hearing officer and it's come back, and we have had to participate as an appeal board, which is not very fun, but the whole reason is to try to help the public understand that we are here to hear your concerns and to help them be addressed, and for things to get improved and to be better. At the same time, it may look like we're not doing, like, it may look like the problem is not being addressed, but it is on the back channels, perhaps even involving personnel files, but those are not public, so.
Yeah, and I would only add that it's not, that the process itself is critical, right? We don't make decisions on back channels. We make decisions based on our process. What we don't do is we don't advertise the outcomes of that process. And I think that that's a critical distinction. And I also think it's critical that you, as board members, have an understanding of the process, at least to the degree that you can discuss that with patrons, so that when a patron asks you questions and why isn't this done, or why hasn't that person been fired, or what have you, that you can discuss with that patron the process that we go through, but not necessarily the facts of that particular issue, right? I think that's critical. And so hopefully, if I went too fast, I know this was was having a drink from a fire hose, but the idea is that the more you're familiar with this process, the more you can feel some confidence in it, and the more you can communicate it to patrons and parents so that they feel confident in it as well. And again, I oversee this process. I oversee all elements of this process. I don't, again, do discipline. I don't issue discipline, but I oversee the process itself. And it is my job to make sure that we are complying with principles of due process and with statutes, regulations, and district policies.
And those processes are good because we can tell our patrons, look, we are helping fix the problem. We may not be hands-on in the personnel file knowing exactly the details, but we can assure them that, hey, we do take that. When a problem is brought before us, then we're going to pass that along and see it through. We often say, okay, let's follow up with the administrator, or let's follow up with even the superintendency, like that. So we do play a critical role in this, but at the same time, it is arm's length as far as when we get in the weeds of the details of the personnel files. Any further questions, Julie?
Well, I just had a comment. I feel that this policy is really our growth policy for our teachers. And so while most of that applies to a very small percentage of teachers who need to go through that whole policy, that first step, which is the performance evaluation, it applies to 100% of our staff, really, right? And I think that often we get so caught up in the discipline aspect of this that taking the first step is really intimidating for a principal. And it's really important for us to create a culture in Granite, just like we're trying to do with PBL, where it's okay to screw up, it's okay to try something and not make it work out, and have a conversation and try it again, and that it's not, like the word warning, maybe if our verbiage can match a little more our PBL, what we do with our students, it might make this an easier thing. What I notice is that principals, this is the hardest part of a principal's job, is to really talk to a teacher in a way that they won't feel threatened, but that they can get on board with helping. And I think a lot of principals will have the conversation, but if the conversation doesn't work, they will not go the next step to a written statement about it, because it's just too big. It basically makes the teacher feel like you've declared war on them, right? And it ruins the atmosphere in your school. And not that I know what to do about it, but I feel like the experts in the room do know what to do about it. And I feel like the first thing to do is to train our new principals in our, what's it called? What's our principal training program? Right, in principal pipeline. Make sure that that is a piece of that curriculum, is how to handle that, so that instead of having a wall where, oh, I tried but I failed, a principal can take that next courageous step because they've already done it, they feel comfortable doing it, and now they can move forward with it. Because I feel like that is where usually the conversation ends.
And I think that's a good point, because I think that's true with both cause and performance, right? With performance and cause. We should be thinking of this in terms of correcting and making our employees better. We should have an environment where and we work with GEA on trying to create and maintain this environment, where our discipline is not always punitive, it's corrective in nature. And that correction, we all need that correction at times. I need that correction at times. We all need that correction at times. And the idea being that if we're not reflecting and correcting, we're not improving. And we should always be improving in all of our roles.
And I know that GEA supports this ideology because teachers are happier when they're growing, right?
Yeah, and I just wanted to comment that we actually do have this built into our principal pipeline, and everything that we do with our first-year academies or second-year academies with principals hits on this entire process. Our coaching process has been built around building our teachers' capacity, building our principals' capacity. It's not just strictly about compliance, but also building. And we do focus more on the corrective side of things rather than the discipline side of things. But you do have to have both components in it for obvious reasons. And I'd also like to say that just recently we've jumped into a program with the University of Utah where we have 40 of our current leaders that are attending, and we just had back-to-back weeks on this very content. So, and it's excellent. And what was really exciting to see is just yesterday, the university asked us how we're applying what we're learning, and they were able to come up with some real-life examples of things they're doing on this very subject. So,
Thank you for that, John. I also wanted to say that to the extent to which our principals can pay attention to this is reliant on the extent to which we as board members can pay attention to the previous slideshow about safety. When we set a structure in place for our kids to be safe, our principals can turn their attention to teacher and student growth. But otherwise, safety is going to take up all their concerns, especially at the secondary level. But you already know how I feel about all that.
My only comment is, along with principals feeling like they're empowered, I know, especially those who've worked in the district for a while, I hope we're working with GEA, especially to get this out, that we are gearing this more towards not just discipline, not just, we're here to, slap your hand and do that, because I think it's an old culture from previous years that some employees feel like, oh, they're here to, they're here to discipline me, and it's a scary thing for some. So keeping that in mind, working still with our employees too, to help them understand this process, I think is important.
Nicole, you're talking about when district leaders walk in the building, that there's an aspect of like, oh, they're coming to get us. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Well, and not even just district leaders, but also your principal. Your principal's coming down to your room. Oh, are they here to, try to catch me doing something wrong? And it's a hard, when that culture was set a while ago, it's a long time ago, but it was still, it takes a while to change culture. It does take a while, but I hope we're really helping our employees see that as well, that, hey, look, this is, and maybe that's something that we need to do better at communicating with them, is that this is the discipline, this is our process, and it's not just a punitive process, but this is we want to build a culture just like you do with your own students, that we can do better, we can get better. And
as you said, GEA is integral in that process, and we recognize that.
For sure, absolutely. My question was just some clarification. I know we went over the policy as far as what's in an employee file and what's not. Where in this, can you just clarify for everybody what remains in an employee file, what doesn't, what goes into an employee file, what follows them, what gets taken out, et cetera, et cetera. I know that might be a big question.
And without getting too far into the weeds, so the idea is that a corrective, in that corrective process, anything that is a district level warning or above will go into an employee's personnel file. And it will remain there if performance issues, and this is actually part of the negotiated agreement. Performance issues can be petitioned to be removed after a 5-year period if an employee wants that removed. Cause issues we maintain for obvious reasons. We need to make sure that there's at least institutional awareness of conduct issues, even if we don't necessarily build on them for discipline. We maintain them for our own records. And I should mention that we don't build on any discipline when a principal comes to ask and is considering what discipline is appropriate. We don't build on any discipline that's 3 years old or older, and that's because we anticipate that corrective process has really taken root if 3 years have gone by and we haven't had a need to correct any further. But we do maintain cause issues in those files. Connie, you asked me previously about what about school files. When a principal has or issues a formal warning at the school level, then that does stay at the school because we do have principals that come and go. But once again, we don't discipline on anything that's 3 years old or older.
That does not travel. That doesn't travel to a new school if a teacher goes to a new school, if it's a performance issue with.
Not performance, right.
I do like that last slide where it is to be kind, and I appreciate that's the attitude you take. Let's be kind and try and help them. Thanks.
Any further questions? All right. Thank you for that. Board members, we've made it through our agenda in an hour and 20 minutes, hour and 15 minutes, and we have groundbreaking at Skyline. Not a groundbreaking. Dude, yes, thank you. I look over at Rich and he's making the scissors sign. Anyway, I'm sorry, we've already far broken ground on Skyline. Is it Friday yet? Okay, so we have a ribbon cutting to open up the gymnasium where the girls volleyball. There's a girls volleyball game scheduled, and so I think a lot of the board members are hustling to Skyline after this, or they're at least invited to. So, but first we need to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a motion?
A motion that we adjourn.
We have a motion and a second on the table to adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thanks everybody.